Hi, everybody, and welcome to Friday Night Flock Talk. I'm Robin Sullivan of the Leather Elves. That was Bird Gardens of Naples that you saw if you signed on early. There's a live stream that you can look at they're on YouTube. They're also on Twitch, and you can see the macaw flight at Bird Gardens of Naples, a an owl box, a hawk platform, and I forget what the last one is, but it's pretty fun to be able to see what's going on 24/7 down at Bird Gardens of Naples. So check that out if you get a chance. The usual reminders and introductions. You can like the Leather Elves on Facebook. That way you get notifications. You can check our Facebook page to catch surprise sales, pop-up events, things like that. You can also follow the Leather Elves on Instagram, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel. So tonight's guest is a returning guest, and I'm really excited to have her. It's Dr. Paulette Santonacita. Dr. Paulette grew up on a 7-acre farmette in Marengo, Illinois, where she enjoyed caring for a variety of animals, ranging from hamsters to cows. That's a big variation.
Big difference.
Hamsters to cows, right? She earned her Bachelor of Science in Animal Sciences as well as her doctorate in veterinary medicine from the University of Illinois. After vet school, Dr. Paulette followed her love of the outdoors and relocated to the Pacific Northwest. We were just talking about she likes the gray. Is that what it is?
Yes, the rain.
It was too
I
much
know.
fun in Illinois. Her special interests include small mammal, exotic, and avian medicine. In her free time, Dr. Paulette enjoys rock climbing, hiking, kayaking, and spending time with friends. But most of all, Dr. Paulette enjoys spending time with her companion animals. How are you?
Oh, I'm so good. And first of all, thank you so much for having me back. I'm so excited to be here.
Anytime. You are welcome anytime. So I'm reading, the things you enjoy, the rock climbing, the hiking, the kayaking. So now we're talking about things that it's better if it's hazy is our kind of gray. Is that
So interestingly enough, no, those things you do want sun. So at least it gives me something to look forward to when it's sunny.
there you go. You have to get your vitamin D somehow. I'm
I
just saying.
guess.
You're the doctor, but we're still gonna, I'm still gonna push for you to get some of that vitamin D. So tonight's topic is something that I've discussed lately, a lot of disease, transmission that's happening that we're seeing, in all different kinds of facilities. We've talked about what you can do yourself, and so when I talked to Dr. Paulette, when I was talking to you, it was about how do we keep our environment safe, and I think that's so important. um,
Exactly.
I mean, we love coming to see you, but we could do that socially instead of in the office with something that's got to be taken care of. So I guess the first question is what what diseases do you see the most in parrots?
Yeah. That is a great question, and what a question to start off with. So I'm gonna I'm gonna list some things now. Basically, I'm gonna list a bunch. We're gonna scare the crap out of you, but then we're gonna shift the conversation into how do we take these lists and how do we try to avoid some of them in our flock and take care of our flock. So
Yeah.
when you ask me that question, diseases in parrots, you start thinking about the classic things that you've kind of recently talked about in your lectures, or the things that we try to associate with parrot med, like beak and feather disease, chlamydia, polyoma, Pacheco's disease, nonspecific toxins. However, in reality, I'm not seeing much of that in practice, which is really good. Though it is good to keep those things in your thoughts while taking care of your flock. What I
Mhm.
normally see for diseases in parrots in the office are flare-ups of avian gastric yeast and budgies, bornovirus related diseases, metal toxicities, trauma, gastrointestinal disturbances from off GI flora. And taking all these things into account that are scary, we can slowly start talking about how we come up with a plan to protect our flock from what's out there. try to protect our flock, I should say.
So the biggies, the ones that do come to mind, beacon feather, polyoma, those you're not seeing as much of, which is
No,
fantastic.
which is
Um,
great.
but the other, I mean, they're not any, just because they're not the big ones, they're not any less scary or less important, right?
Right. And I think the big ones are you would agree, the most scariest. We're lucky we don't see a lot of it, but part of that could be because we're testing and really monitoring for it too.
So,
So,
okay, so we're looking at these things, we're looking at what we don't want to happen. I mean, and I think we didn't talk about this beforehand, so I'm going to throw this out at
oh,
you.
no.
Um, as far as, I mean, is it are okay, the ones that aren't as scary, the
Yeah,
ones you see on a more regular basis.
yeah.
Are those things that people are probably going to see in the course of owning birds?
Absolutely. And we might get into it a little bit later, but when we start talking about trying to do disease prevention in our flocks, we're going to prevent some of it, but inevitably we're always going to see something, whether it creeps in or whether it's just comes from our flock. Um, yeah, and we'll talk about that in a second.
Okay. Okay. So, all right, we know what they are. We've named them. How are they transmitted?
Yeah. And this is where it kind of all starts coming full circle a little bit. So I will say, Robin, you always seem to allow me to sneak in my favorite topic, poop. So in the first lecture, I think I was really excited about poop too.
You
Um,
were.
and in this case, when we talk about diseases and how they're transmitted, in this case, our biggest culprit of disease transmission is poop a lot of times. And you can see how easy that can happen. Poop particles are everywhere. Someone poops in the communal water bowl, even though you change it twice daily. Um, someone poops, someone walks through it and they got it on their little birdie feet, but then they're touching everything and they're touching their face, they're out and they're picking their nose, their ears. So that can be a really big culprit. And even when poop dries and you're really good at cleaning, just cleaning up that dry poop, it creates some dry dust, and that dust can even be transmissible to some pathogens. Some other ways we see diseases that are transmitted, obviously, you probably all know too well, is the feather dust, and just by respiratory secretions.
Okay. So
Um,
I need to go back to poop though, because I know how
yeah.
much you like to talk about poop.
Yeah.
So I've got my aviary, I've got my cages,
Mhm.
however I'm keeping my birds. How often am I, in a perfect world, how often
Yeah.
am I cleaning up poop?
Yeah, in a perfect world, you should be spot cleaning daily. You should be doing big cleans weekly and then deep cleans monthly. Um, and really thinking about what cleaners you're using too is can be very important in that protocol that you may create for your flock.
Okay. All right. So then we've got, feather dust, we've got respiratory secretions. What else do we need to be worrying or thinking about? Let's not say worrying, let's say
Yeah.
thinking about.
Exactly. And so with that beginning list that we created, the ones we really worry or the ones we don't often see, and then the ones we often see, some of them are not transmissible diseases, but they're more diseases like trauma or metal toxicity. But when you start to analyze your flock environment, there are ways to plan or coordinate your flock in your home to avoid certain accidents, to avoid traumas, or with the metal toxicities. I think the main point with that is just be mindful where you're getting your bird toys, your perches, your bird information, your bird cages. Make sure you have a trusted source for those things. You can talk to your vet about a trusted source. You can talk to your local aviculturist. I know you had Jodie Ohms on the other week. She's a great aviculturist, great resource for a lot of this, of what are reputable places and safe places to buy your bird toys. Um, so yeah, I think that's kind of everything you're looking at when you're thinking about disease transmission, whether it's something they can catch or in general.
Right, right. And I think that's a really good point. Some of it is transmissible. Some of it is, we do need to worry about how is it transmitted? Are we doing everything we need to do? And then the other piece is the trauma that can happen from, not observing when you're putting new birds together. I think
Mhm.
that's very important when you introduce a bird to your flock, that you think about what those interactions may be and make sure that you safeguard. And then,
Yeah,
the toys, as a toy maker, I can tell you that safety is always at the front of my mind. It's,
exactly.
I play worst case scenario that, like, okay, that bird that is a little extra clumsy or a little, special, I have to think to that level, like, yes, there's the bird that's not going to, he's just going to chew everything up. He's going to be fine. Then there's the bird that's going to eat everything he possibly can get near his beak. And
Yeah.
then there's the bird that just is a little bit slower and needs a little extra. And so, but you got to think about those things. And, you know, this is not a push for my company, but you get what you pay for, kind of thing.
Exactly. Truly.
You can find those cheap toys online. You can find, yeah, safety first, Jody says, absolutely. And you can find toys and go, oh, this is a great price. Sometimes it is, but if you do that and you get those toys, please take a look at them so that it may be for a different kind of bird, maybe a bird that's not as big a chewer or as rough a player when they're interacting with toys. So just please promise me, everybody who's listening, that when you're buying toys, you if you do the bargain way, and that's fine if that's what your budget, but make sure they're safe once you get them.
And
So,
even if you're buying those cheaper toys, at least you're identifying the risk of what could happen. So you're more apt to watch for those signs if something is going to happen.
right, right. Yeah,
Um,
Jody says toys are safe for some birds, may not be for yours. Yeah, I
that's a good,
mean, you really have to think that through. So,
yeah.
all right, so we're looking at toys, we're watching that, we're being careful when we're introducing new flock members. What else do people need to be watching for?
Yeah, that's a good question. So let me know if I'm not hitting on this question exactly right. But when I hear that question, I just think of illness, I suppose. So we're kind of honing into that area. And so we all know the typical list of what to watch for when a bird gets sick: the decreased eating, the decreased feces amount, change in feces consistency, increased drinking, urinating, sitting on the bottom of the cage, flupped up, sneezing, coughing, all the obvious stuff, right?
Mhm.
But when
Wait,
you start looking at,
I got to stop you for 1 second. So
yeah,
those are obvious things, but
mm-hmm,
knowing what's different
mm-hmm,
comes from observing. You need to be observant when things aren't bad, when things are okay. What does Freddie look like when he's healthy and happy? What does he look like? And then you'll know when, oh, he's not eating as much. And how about weighing your food, knowing what you're feeding so that
mm-hmm,
all of a sudden he's going through, you know, an eighth of a cup instead of a quarter of a cup, whatever it is for your size bird. Um,
right,
I just think so. Yes, there are things that we do know about, but
obvious.
right, but we've got to still know what it looks like when it's normal.
Exactly. And like I was going to say, is some of these diseases that we talked about, they're so subtle or they might not have any clinical signs at all. And just as you said, you have to learn your flock, your birds, to know if those subtle changes are happening, because a lot of times we do find things with those very subtle changes.
Yeah, Carrie brought up heart and liver disease. You
Mhm.
know,
Very,
they can creep up on you and you don't even know
yeah,
they're happening.
exactly.
So yeah. Um, so okay. So I've got my bird. I've watched it. I know what's normal. I know what's not normal.
Yeah.
What? Okay, I suspect there may be something going on. What are
Yeah.
the steps that I need to take?
Exactly. So, shameless plug for myself in the vet field is when any type of disease is suspected, it is always so important to just go to the vet. Um, And when you go to the vet, there will be a list of diagnostics, a base diagnostics that you should perform to help us try to figure out what is going on with your bird. So those diagnostics include blood work, x-rays, fecal analysis. And if those diagnostics show something and your clinical signs show something, and they start to get supportive of another disease, there will probably be additional testing that your vet might want to kind of prove out what is going on with that bird. Is it going to be harmful for the rest of your flock, etc.? So,
And so I think too, I mean, and this is absolutely not a slight on the veterinary profession. How does someone know what's reasonable as far as how much more testing should I do?
yeah. Um, and let me know if we should word this a different way. But I guess hearing that, I think you have to really take your vet's lead and trust that they're a knowledgeable avian vet so they can recommend the appropriate tests.
Mm.
So, there, yeah. So, does that answer your question?
Yes and no. I mean, I think, well, first of all, I think that brings up a really good point that you have to build a relationship with your
Hmm.
vet so that you when when things are normal, so that
Yeah,
when you do have something that comes up and you go in, you are comfortable already with that professional.
right.
um, and I know, sometimes some of the big corporate conglomerates that have taken over smaller practices
Yeah,
will offer, it's the big battery of tests.
yeah.
um, what's so what is and I don't want to put you on the spot, but
Okay.
you don't have to answer this if you don't want to. What's
Yeah,
reasonable when I bring my bird in and say, he's not eating as much, he's kind of lethargic?
yeah. And so, what is reasonable for that? Kind of what I just listed is I really think that there's a base diagnostics that you should always do, whether they're healthy or not. Like we said before, some of these diseases, they look
Mhm,
healthy. So, getting those blood work, x rays, and gram stain, fecal analysis is really helpful, a good start.
mhm.
And again, going from there, if additional tests are needed, if we are starting to catch on to something, an abnormality in one of those.
Okay. Yeah, and
Yeah.
Michelle brings up too that with her male cockatoo, um,
Yeah.
is it illness or is it the season?
Yeah.
Is
Exactly.
it what are you seeing? And so because Michelle is so familiar with Shadow, her cockatoo,
Yeah.
she knows the difference. She knows
Yep.
what it looks like. And so that goes
Yeah.
back to that observation piece. Um,
Exactly.
so, okay. So we've got the testing done. We, suspect that there's
Be
something
something.
going on. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. So quarantine versus isolation.
Yep.
Let's talk about that because we throw those words around and I'm not sure we really understand what they mean.
Exactly. So that, and especially when you're getting into bigger flocks, it's really good to understand those two things. Or even if you just have one or two birds, but one gets sick, what does your vet direct? So when we talk about quarantine and isolation, in a way, they are both the same thing. They're both trying to prevent disease, but in I guess when I'm thinking about it, quarantine is at the beginning when a bird is trying to enter your flock, you're trying to stop the disease from coming or analyzing your risk there. Hopefully I said quarantine.
Yep.
Isolation is at the other end of things where you already have your flock and somebody might get sick. You want to start trying to isolate that bird away, trying to quarantine off, isolate off that disease so it won't spread through your flock.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
And that absolutely makes sense. I mean, and I think, so when are we looking at that isolation happening? When do we go, oh, it's something I need to separate this bird from the rest of the flock? When does that come in?
yeah. So I guess we've kind of listed this where one when they're incoming, you should just quarantine every bird that's coming into your home. The
Mhm.
normal quarantine, depending on what species or I guess even animal you're talking about, it could be anywhere from 14 days to 30 days. Birds, we tend to err on the side of 30 days, watching for
Mhm.
disease. Isolation, obviously, kind of on the other side of it, is probably the same thing. Shoot more for 30 days.
Mhm. So, okay, part of quarantine, before you bring this bird into the flock, would you suggest a vet visit, like at the
Yeah.
beginning or during quarantine at some point?
That would be ideal. We'll talk about later about
Mhm.
forming your flock or start thinking about your flock's biosecurity measures. And so I think you're going to start getting into a pattern of what do you want your flock screened for, whether that's still just basic blood work or any disease testing. So in that quarantine, I think it's very important to get a vet visit, get your testing done that is right for your flock or gold standard, which we'll talk about later. Um, and also making sure you're practicing appropriate quarantine and isolation
Mhm.
methods. And we'll talk about it to I'll talk about it real quick. But you can also talk about it with your vet to make sure that, especially if your situation is not perfect, you don't have an extra room, how do you safely quarantine and isolate?
Right. So, w- if okay, again, we throw the words around: quarantine,
Yeah,
isolation. Oh yeah, I
yeah,
quarantine. Oh yeah, I do. I've isolated that bird. What does good quarantine
correct.
slash isolation look like?
Yeah. So we're going to talk about the gold standard. So
Mhm.
when we talk about quarantine or isolation, again, basically same thing, just different ends of the spectrum. Uh, you really want to have your quarantine or isolation in a separate room than all your other animals. One better would be a separate building, but a lot of us don't have that option. So, in that separate room, you need to think about strict sanitation practices. As we already said about the disease transmission for a lot of this is your poop, your dust, your secretions. So you really want to block that off. And if you're going to get any of that on you, you need to start thinking about that. So, washing your hands, not swapping toys between your isolated birds and non. You need to
Mhm.
think about even when you go to scrub those dishes, you probably should have a separate scrub brush for your isolation rooms.
Mhm.
And so I think that's really good. One other big note, which is a little harder in a home, but you should really be taking care of that quarantine or isolation bird last. So in case you do get a little contaminated, you're not going around to everybody else then.
Right. And I think I, I mentioned it when we were talking about beak and feather with another guest I had on. We were talking about how transmissible it is, and that Dr. Branson Ritchie talked about he would never have pet birds because he could bring it home on his eyelashes.
Yeah.
So when we think, it feels like a lot like, oh, doing that one last, or even changing my clothes or taking off my shoes, different shoes. What about a foot bath? I mean, is that,
Yeah. And as you start getting up into more strict isolation and quarantine protocols, foot baths come in, gowns come in.
yeah,
We even have to practice some of that at the vet clinic with scarier cases.
yeah, yeah.
So that's all
And,
very good note.
and I think that, that's important is that, and that the biggest one for me has always been that that pet gets taken care of last
Hmm.
because, it's, I think we all, we love our pets. We want what's best for them, but sometimes life gets in the way and you do oh yeah, I took care of him. I washed my hands real quick and I went.
Hmm.
Okay. If you're lucky, nothing's going to get transmitted. If you're not, this could be a huge issue. And I
Yeah.
think we really need to think about, okay, I'm going to do this. And it doesn't make it any less care. It doesn't make it, oh, that poor bird or that poor animal, I'm taking care of him last or her last. It's better for everybody across the board to do it that
Yeah.
way.
And
Uh,
sometimes it is so hard to practice this when you bring home your cute little new bird and you want to socialize him, but you can
mhm.
protect your whole flock by locking him away for a minute.
He'll be fine. They really will. It's so true, but you're right. It's tough, and oh, I want the socialization piece. We get that drilled into us so
Yeah.
often that, oh, you've got to, socialize right out of the gate. 30 days is not going to make or break that socialization piece.
Yeah.
It's just not. Um, so, all right, we're going to talk about what's good biosecurity protocol. What can be avoided if you've got that good protocol going on?
Yeah. So I many, I'm going to say this, many of the diseases can be avoided with a good biosecurity protocol, especially if you're preemptively identifying the general risks of certain diseases or your flock.
Mhm.
However, I do want to note that and we've kind of already touched base on it, but having good biosecurity won't stop disease, because it can come from an E. coli outbreak that somebody pooped in the water and it overgrew. But
Right.
even if you found disease in your flock or something outbreaks, with that biosecurity protocol, it can help and allow you to manage that disease better in your flock. And sometimes
Mhm.
you have to live with the disease processes, and it can help you manage living with it appropriately and safely.
Mhm. Cindy, I just read Cindy's comment here. She said, very much reminds me of the peak of COVID when her partner would come home from the hospital, strip down, and go immediately to the shower before even saying hi. I'm sorry, Cindy, but I think, one of the positive things that came out of COVID is I think a lot of us are more aware
Yeah.
of disease transmission. That was something that none of us really, unless you had a collection of animals or, several animals, you didn't really have to think about that, except, the kid that was hacking and coughing next to you on the bus or whatever. But, that is one of the good things that did come out of COVID, I think, is we're a little bit more aware of how that disease transmission happens. Um,
Exactly.
so we've been throwing around the word biosecurity protocol.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what is that?
Yeah. So, and this will kind of form, I guess, the full circle of what we listed earlier is biosecurity protocol for your flock isn't just about disease testing. It's about the entire analysis and a planning around your flock. So again, it brings in that trauma aspect, the bird toy aspect, the non-transmissible things. So when you create your protocol will influence your quarantine, what viral diseases you will test for, what is your frequency of cleaning or realistic frequency of cleaning, what to watch for in your flock, just analyzing what kind of birds are in your flock or what you may bring in will help kind of guide what your protocol will be, if that makes sense.
And I think, we've listed all these, and a lot of them are diseases that we've all heard of, but it might
Mm-hmm.
be helpful for people to do some research on their own. Like, what is beak and feather? What does it look? How does it present? What does it look like? And I mean, with beak and feather is one of those that the bird can look fine and
Mm-hmm.
still be positive. So
Right.
there are several of those out there, but I think it's important for us to familiarize ourselves with, and don't get crazy. Don't do the WebMD route where you go, oh God, I think I have this and now I have that, and because you can do that. I mean, we've all freaked ourselves out about certain things, I'm sure,
Yeah.
but being more familiar with what these diseases look like
Mhm.
really can help. Carrie asked the question, what tests do you recommend for larger facilities?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. We'll mention this at the end too, but really it's kind of you're going to do your four big main viral diseases: your polyoma, your beak and feather, your chlamydia, and your did I say beak and feather yet? And your
Yeah.
Pacheco's disease. Yeah. So those are your four big main ones that you should be testing for, especially when you have a facility that birds may be coming in and out. There's different ages of birds, from young chicks to big adults. All of that has to be taken into an account. And even the species that might be in there. Do you
Mhm.
have different species or a single species? um, I guess just an example to go on the beak and feather disease is, let's say you have a flock and you found a cute little lovebird at the store and he looks great, before you bring in a flock, into your flock, test that little lovebird for that beak and feather, because like you said, they will show no signs, but it can really hurt your flock.
And I will say from what I'm hearing across the country, beacon feather is making a resurgence.
Yeah.
And it's so unfortunate because there's nothing you can do, right? Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
there is no cure.
Yeah.
Um,
Prevention
so
is kind of for your
yeah.
flock.
And I think that's something that we need to be aware, have it like in the back of your head that that's prevention. What is it? An ounce of, I don't know the saying. It's something about like an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure or something like that.
Something like that, but it sounds great.
I just made that up. No, I didn't. Um,
It sounds good though.
so we want to make sure that people, discuss this with their vets. This is when you're creating a protocol, run it by your vet. That shouldn't be, if you're going on a regular basis, when you go in for a wellness check, a wellness visit, say, hey, this is what I'm kind of doing for my biosecurity plan or protocol. What do you think? But what are some things that could influence people's protocol? What are
Yeah.
some of the things they should be thinking about?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm going to repeat some of the things I just said, but we'll add some more. So, like I said, things that will influence your protocol. Again, what we've kind of just said is, are your birds going out of the house, social events, grooming days, boarding? Do they have exposure to other animals? With the other animals, are you having an indoor flock or outdoor flock? With the outdoor flock, are you worrying about avian bird flu? How do you biosecure for that? Again, rats, other animals that may be trying to come in, that's part of your biosecurity analysis and protocol. Indoor is when you have an indoor flock, what types of birds are you keeping in there? We know our old world birds are really dusty and they can give some cause allergic airway disease. So, heck, in our biosecurity protocol, we're going to have a lot of air air purifiers. And so we
Yeah.
want that. um Analyzing where you're getting a bird from, especially again if you're growing your flock. If you're getting birds from a chain pet store, a specialty bird store, and a breeder down in Florida, some of those may sound better or worse, but analyze those areas too. So if you're getting, let's say, a conure from a big chain store, we know big chain stores, budgies really like to flare up with avian gastric yeast. Maybe you, before you let that conure into your facility or your flock, test it, double check that it didn't get cross contaminated with a budgie with AGY. We really respect a lot of bird breeders, and there can be some really, you can try to get a bird from the most respectable bird breeder down in Florida, but we just want to keep in the back of our mind that Florida does have a high prevalence of polyoma virus just because of that humid environment. So those little things of where you're getting your bird, what species is it, all can create this beautiful protocol area that you can try to cover and prevent as much as you can for your flock.
Well, that brings up a really good point when you talk about like in Florida, the high humidity. That's
Yeah.
something when you're looking into these diseases, what kind of helps grow them? What helps, helps foster that disease where, humidity, polyoma. I mean, those are the kind of things that you really need to think about. Nick asked, what concerns should we have when participating in parrot social events?
That is a really good question. So whoever's setting up the social events, our hope would be that again we kind of tested maybe for the big four, and so we're not really getting to exposed to those big four diseases, the scariest ones. But then, just like when we send our kid to daycare and they get exposed to maybe respiratory pathogens or not usual pathogens we find in our home, there is always a little bit of risk with social events, and we kind of learned that through COVID too. So it is always a little bit of a risk to bring your bird to a social event, but it is life as well.
hmm Yeah, Nick said he knows that Flight Club Foundation has requirements for their flight days. And so I
Exactly.
think that's something, if you're running a social event or you're going to be part of a regular club meeting where they allow you to bring your birds, maybe talk to the organizers, or if you are the organizer, think about having some requirements for that. So it's not a, a viral, free for all. We don't want
Exactly.
that to happen. Yeah, Jody says things happen to even the best breeders and facilities. It's about what we do with and about it afterwards. That's so
That is,
so critical.
yeah,
Yeah,
that is a fabulous statement. That's beautiful.
and so there's a lot that goes into it.
Mm.
And I think it's just being mindful is part of it. That we don't just go, oh, it's going to be fine. Oh, I don't. I'm please. I want people to stop. I wish we could just lose the term "that'll never happen to me."
Exactly.
I mean,
It will.
you never know. And again, we we learned that in COVID too, I took
I
all
know.
and, and here I am with that positive test stick, just we need to really work on how we're doing things,
Mhm.
how we're maintaining things. I know Karen said they revisited their protocols this past year. Karen runs
Yeah.
Avian Suites boarding facility, and they now require a lot more information from new and returning clients,
Yeah.
and testing for all new clients. And they ask that if they've added or changed the flock, because that's important
That
too. When you're
is.
going to a social event and you're like, oh, I know Mary Sue, her birds are always healthy, they're healthy. She checks them, she tests them. Well, maybe Mary
Mhm.
Sue got in a lovebird,
Yeah,
and that it has PBFD.
exactly.
But yeah, that's good. Karen, that's great.
Yeah.
And and so, okay, so we've done our due diligence. We've got all that, we really considered biosecurity. We really thought it through. Now one of your birds gets a diagnosis of a communicable disease. What are we
Mhm.
going to do now?
Yeah. So again, we're gonna go back to the vet. So I'm assuming you got that diagnosis from the vet. And that's kind of the key here is you got a diagnosis. You know what is affecting that bird or what may affect your flock. So with that new information and with your vet you can now update your biosecurity protocols with that extra understanding of the disease and what is needed to treat that disease. So it's great if you update your biosecurities preemptively, but if something does sneak past, you got this. Just change, figure out what was the spark of it and
Mhm.
alter it a little bit.
Right. And I think that's, and that's something that talking to you guys as veterinarians is something that people should hopefully feel comfortable about. Um, you're welcome, Jen. And really, things so if you get that diagnosis, you don't want to go home and just not really know what you're doing. I mean, is it fair for a client to say to you as a veterinarian, like, hey, where do I go from here? What would you suggest now?
Absolutely. And you should be talking to your vet with that when you do get that diagnosis. Because again, vet and your relationship, it's all about teamwork. And again, you
Mhm.
have a flock to protect. And you guys can work together to figure out what you need to do and alter and how to treat. So teamwork
Right.
is key with your and talk to them.
Okay. And you mentioned back before when we were talking, you mentioned what you're cleaning with. We hadn't really discussed this, but what you're
Yeah.
cleaning with. What are you? So, it, are there different cleaning agents for different diseases or disease types?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the biggest, broadest statement I can make is F10 is really good for a lot of the viral diseases. I don't
Mhm.
think we have a lot of studies on rescue, but rescue has been shown to do really well with many viral diseases like avian flu.
Mhm.
And this is where you also work with your vet, because when we get a diagnosis, we have to double check what's the good cleaner, and double check that your cleaner is okay for that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's really important to think about what you're using to clean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, PBFD,
Yeah.
that's more than your just average deep clean.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's
Unfortunately.
my first suggestion is just burn the building to the ground.
No.
But no, we don't want to do that. But I mean, if someone gets a PBFD diagnosis, that is something that there needs to be a ton of research. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And how we're going to clean it, and how do you quarantine? I think your facility is in quarantine for a while after that. And how long is it in quarantine? There's so much scary thing around that. But that's where you really need your vet to outline it.
So, okay. So we keep coming back to this, and that relationship with your veterinarian is critical. I mean, we all wish we lived where you live, and then we could have that relationship with you. But really, Jody says that relationship is one of the most important things.
It
And so
is.
you've got to feel comfortable. I reached out to you. We were talking about a situation that my son had with not a bird, but with a dog, and they hadn't built a relationship with that veterinarian. They had gone and a couple times, but there wasn't a relationship, and they weren't comfortable asking questions. And
Yeah.
it's still a good outcome so far, so we're doing okay. But having, I felt super lucky that I had you to call, and I have another friend who's a veterinarian that I called, and it's but you've got to build up that relationship. I think
Exactly.
it's critical. So all right, so we know kind of what we're looking for. We know, can we come up with a generalized biosecurity plan? Because I know, that's part of the reason people are listening tonight. It's your fabulous personality and mine that brought them here, but
Yes.
now they do need to get something out of this. So have we got something generalized as a plan that we can suggest?
Heck yes. And if you've all been listening through this entire presentation, this is going to be a perfect summary of what we've just talked about, and everything, how it comes full circle. So, one, as you guys know, everything revolves around poop. So cleanliness, if you're going to do anything, cleanliness is key. Spot
Mhm.
cleaning daily to weekly with your monthly deep cleans with that good cleaner that's going to kill germs is great. But then you go from there, thinking about what types of birds you're getting. I still think to make a big point of your indoor versus outdoor. Your indoor, get your air purifiers in there, especially if you're mixing old world and new world birds, just so everybody's air quality is beautiful. Making
Can I
sure,
stop you for one? Can I just stop you for 1 second? Can you explain to
yes,
people the difference between old world and new world? Because not everybody
yeah,
differentiates that way.
sure. So your new world birds are going to be, somebody shout out if I get anything wrong, but macaws, your conures, and they get finer dust. Your old world birds, they're your Amazons, your grays, your cockatiels, the ones that really get very dusty, your cockatoos.
Mhm.
We all know those birds so well, and you see that pile of dust from their feathers
Yep.
when you're taking care of them. That is the old world bird. And really, I think it has fell out of favor with separating them. I think it used to be a bigger thing in the avian community of trying to keep them separate. I don't think that's necessarily necessary anymore. And really, it is truly just that there's a possibility of that dust causing an allergic airway. So it's not a huge key, but I really think that just helps in your general cleanliness with
Mhm.
dust.
Yeah.
So
No, and
I think that,
I think you're absolutely right. It was a really big deal in the past to keep them
mhm.
separated, but we've gotten away from that, and air purifiers have improved so much. Um, Kim wants to know, what would you consider two cans?
We're going to Google that later. I'm guessing New World. I don't
I'm
think they
thinking
have
New
so many.
World, Kim.
Yeah.
And yeah, because they're not as dusty as like the cockatoos, the grays, those guys.
Exactly.
She was going to ask the difference. There we go. I'm glad I could help.
Ah,
Um,
yeah.
and you know, and that happens sometimes is like when you've been doing this a long time, which obviously Dr. Paulette has not, and I have because of the gray hair, but you know, there's phrases that we toss around that we don't really we don't really always think about it. Oh no, no need for sorry, Kim. Absolutely not. In fact, I know that Nick is probably right now looking up whether they're old world or
Please.
old. Um, Karen says, please be careful using air purifiers. They are not created equal.
Read.
Yeah, very true. Read the reviews, and then weed out the ones that just absolutely sound like the person that owns the company wrote them. Uh,
Yeah,
so we just, you got to be careful with that. So, okay, I interrupted. I'm sorry, but
that's okay. I love these little
Michelle says
tangents.
that
But
Michelle wins the prize. Google says their new world. Okay. All
woo!
right.
Good job, Michelle.
Yes.
Teamwork, per
Oh, and
usual.
Nick confirmed that they are New World. Look at that. You guys are
Good.
such a good team. This is why we
Yeah.
do trivia a lot, so their Google skills improve.
Oh, I love it. Back us up. This is teamwork at its finest. So, anyways, we're talking about our good biosecurity plan. So let's keep listing some things and interrupt as you need. So, and again, this is all repeat. We're going to be making sure we're getting our toys from reputable places.
Mhm.
You don't want your whole flock getting a metal toxicosis from cheap bells from a site. Another thing is you're going to be making sure you're practicing your 30-day quarantine, even when you get that cute new baby bird. It's going to be hard, but we can do it. And then last but not least, we've said this earlier, the gold standard is to test for the four main viral diseases of the birds: polyoma, beak and feather, herpes, and chlamydia. And especially when you're getting into big flocks or a lot of social outings, you really want to do all four of those. However,
Mhm.
like I said, gold standard and reality, analyze your flock. If your flock is not multi-species, and there may be diseases that are less prevalent in your species, or you just don't have that many incoming birds, you can tailor your flock to what is appropriate for you.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
that's about
and
it.
I think that's a great, starting place for a plan. I think we should all have them, because like we said in the beginning, the chances are you're going to probably be up against something on this list, not the
Yeah.
major one, something on this list, um,
Yeah.
at some point in time. So as far as the isolation piece, I want to go back to that for a second, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Um, so obviously the big four, we're going to
Mhm.
isolate if we get a diagnosis of any of that. But what
Yeah.
about, like gastric yeast? I mean, are we still isolating? We are.
Yeah. So basically, you want to isolate for everything, and we also kind of said earlier to maybe bring a vet in there,
Mhm.
because you may run some basic diagnostics, whether it's viral, whether it's a gram stain, just to analyze that gut bacteria.
Mhm.
I do have some birds that don't have good bacteria in their poop. They've been rough for a very long time. You do want to correct out that before introducing into your flock. Um,
Sure.
it's interesting about avian gastric yeast because we assume that all budgies have it. It's just truly if it's flared up or not, and if it's highly shedding. So, and that's going to influence actually your biosecurity protocol with your flock, because you might have isolated them for 30 days. Great, they didn't flare up, or maybe they're negative on their PCR. But budgies, we kind of assume they're all positive. So in your flock, your biosecurity protocol is don't let your budgies mix with your other parrots.
Mhm.
So I
Yeah.
think that's a really interesting note.
And how often are we testing? I mean, how often, what's the gold? Is
Yeah.
it yearly? I mean, what's realistic?
Yeah, so a lot of places, and I think what we promote is at least one test in their lifetime. But this is where I think you have to analyze so many of those other aspects. what new birds are they interacting with, and can they pick something up? So really, again, case by case basis, but maybe we should be doing more often. We say once in their lifetime, but just saying it now, it may be needed to be every few years if we really
Well,
want to
and
be strict about
I'm thinking about, false negatives,
it.
false
Yeah,
positives,
yeah,
and, do we need to worry about that if if we're going to introduce a new bird?
yeah,
We want to be pretty hardcore that we know that it's a valid negative all the way across. Um,
yeah.
I mean, and that's hard, and it's not,
It is.
and for a lot of people, it's hard. Like maybe it's tough to catch up the bird and bring them to the vet. Maybe the vet is a terrible, horrible experience. No offense. But,
I know.
I think that's important to think about. Um, and you need to outweigh, weigh the benefits and the risks, I think.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah,
but you know, it is important that we're making sure that we're up to date on those kind of things. And we
yeah,
do a wellness check so that if there's, some weight loss and significant weight loss, or if there are things like that, we can identify that and we see it happening. Um,
exactly.
so Karen brought
Exactly.
up looking at ozone filter type efficiency. Is it reusable, the filter, that their particle size, those kind of things. You suddenly become an expert on like air
Yeah.
purifiers, you know, air systems. And it's like, wait a minute, this was not in the cards. Well, unfortunately, when we get birds, we become specialists in those kind of things, right?
Yeah.
And
It
you never
part of
thought
your
you were going to,
it's
it
part of
is,
your
it's part.
biosecurity.
And you never thought you were going to be the air purifier specialist on the block, but it
Here we
happens
are.
and it's worth it. It's definitely worth it. So, all right. I think it's a lot to take in. It's a lot
Yes.
of, it's a lot of information, but it's really good information. It's really important information.
Yeah.
Um, Final words for people about who want to create this plan. What do you see? I mean, suggestions?
So I guess so we gave you a pretty good outline of where to start, but again, talk to your vet, talk to your aviculturist, talk to other people that have big flocks. I I was able to put some of this together by some clients that have bigger flocks and they have their biosecurity protocols in place.
Mm.
And it's a little bit trial and error for some flocks too, when we're trying to manage it all yourself or many incoming birds. So really, the base that we talked about here today with the cleanliness, the quarantine, the testing for the big viral diseases, and then just reaching your community and seeing what else are people doing to how it can improve your flock. Did that
Yeah.
answer your question? Yeah.
It did. It definitely did. And one other thing that we've been talking about, we've been mentioning, and we haven't, um, we keep talking about big flocks, and I
Hmm.
think one of the problems is um, even if you have one bird and you take it out, you still need to
Yeah.
have a biosecurity plan, or even if you have a pair of budgies that are
Yeah.
always together, you still need to have that biosecurity plan. Um,
Exactly.
People with one bird go, "Oh, but I only have one bird." You do,
Mhm.
but that bird, unfortunately, is still as susceptible to these horrors as,
Exactly.
50 birds. It's,
Yeah.
so yeah, we've just got to, everybody out there who only has one, Michelle, I'm talking to you. No, Michelle has, um, no, and Michelle does a phenomenal job with shadow, so that's not an issue. But just, even with one bird, people still have to be careful and have this in place. It's not, I'm a big plan person. I'm a big like believer in you've got to have a plan for this, you've got to have a plan for that. But once you get them in place, they're not
Right.
that hard to maintain.
Exactly.
So
Especially when you only have one or two birds.
it's
So that's
true.
good. Yeah.
But well, thank you again. I appreciate it so much. Laurie said it was a phenomenal discussion. And you are welcome anytime. I will tell you, my listeners are like, hey, she was great. You need to have her back. So thank you. And maybe I'll get to see you in
August.
Washington in August when we come on the Rockstar Tour. Just in case you don't know, I'm going to tell everybody the Rockstar Tour. We've got the dates in place. We've got these are all our sponsors. We've got our banner all set. We've got cool T-shirts. So if you're going to come out and see us anywhere, which I hope that you are, because I'm going to be. I know where a lot of you live. That sounds creepy, but I know where a lot of you live, and um, we're not going to be far from you. So we've got some really cool shirts, and if you wear your shirt when you come to see us, there will be reinforcers for that behavior. Here's the list. Yeah, it's going to be a long trip, but Carrie's an awesome partner in this. So we're so excited. We're going to get to meet folks at all of these facilities. So that said, get your T-shirt. All you guys out there who don't have them yet, they are on sale only until I think the 24th or the end of May, but sooner rather than later. Yeah, Carrie says she's looking forward to seeing you in Washington. So and we promise not to put you on the spot. Well, we might, but
It'll be fun to see you guys. This is a great community, and I love sharing in the wealth of knowledge we all have together. And this is what makes it fun and powerful in this life.
that's what it is. So thank you again for sharing your knowledge. And like Laurie just reminded me, happy Mother's Day to all the pet moms and the human moms and just everybody out there who's celebrating Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day. And Dr. Paulette, we will see you again soon. Take
We
care.
will see
Have
you
a good
again
one.
soon. Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.